Welcome, everyone. It is such truly an honor and pleasure to be hosting this today with a very special guest, Canadian fashion icon, TV personality and host, entrepreneur, author, editor-in-chief, columnist, and for various print media companies, and truly such a great inspiration for fashion aficionados. Miss Jeanne Beker, the Jeanne Beker, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Janelle, it's an absolute pleasure. Nothing I love doing more than talking about fashion, and speaking with you is a joy. We've had some great conversations in the past, and I'm truly looking forward to this one.
Well, thank you, and it is really for anyone who's looked into fashion or followed fashion for the last few decades. As I was explaining, AFA Canada is celebrating and commemorating our 50th anniversary this year. And we're so happy to have the opportunity to speak with you because you really have had a very long-term relationship with the fashion industry and the fashion world. And many of us have heard all the stories and seen you throughout the decades and been driven from inspiration and different things that you've provided to us throughout your career. But what's really fascinating to me is also you're not only a book of knowledge, but you have such a long history and long love affair with fashion. Tell us about how that began for you and your evolution to where you are today.
Oh, okay. In 25 words or less. No. Boy, that because it's a long, everyone's life obviously is chock full of stories, and so I'll try to edit myself here and tell you the touchstones in my life. But boy, okay, so I grew up in Toronto, a child of immigrant parents. My parents were Holocaust survivors who came over here in 1948 from a DP camp in Poland, in Austria. Actually, they were born in Poland. So I grew up, without having too much in those early days. My mom was a great style maven. She just, as a lot of Eastern European women are, I think, she just had a great feel for style. And she imparted that to my sister and I, but because we didn't really have a lot of money growing up to go out and buy store-bought clothes, she started making a lot of our clothes for us. And that was a great joy. And we used to pore over the pages of Vogue and Harpers Bazaar and just dream a lot. I also used to play with cutout dolls when I was a little kid, those paper dolls where you dress up in different outfits. And
I remember those.
These were, just always flying out there. Then, as a child of the 60s, because, I was born in 1952. By the time, the 60s came around, I was like, became a young teenager and wow, it was such a pivotal time for fashion. As you know, it was really the first time in history where kids really didn't want to dress like their parents. I mean, the late Diana Vreeland called it the youth quake, right, of the 60s. Where all of a sudden wanted to rebel and we wanted to do our own thing and we wanted to do things that had never been done before and, wear really short skirts and guys wanted to wear their hair really long. And it was just such a joyful time for fashion. And I was right into it. And we used to go visit relatives in the States a lot because in those days you couldn't get fabulous hip things in Toronto. I mean, it's incredible now when you think Toronto is such a, mega urban center. But in those days, you really couldn't find the cool stuff. You had to go to the States. So we used to go visit relatives in New York and New Jersey, and I would go to the department stores there and find some of the most fabulous mod clothes. It was great. 1968, my Sweet 16, I got a chance to knock off, and I happen to have right here the picture in the magazine. This outfit was on the cover of 1967 Harpers Bazaar magazine, and I thought it was the bee's knees. I thought it was fabulous, and I really thought, and here is the actual copy of the Harpers Bazaar.
Wow.
Like a mini dress with knee socks.
I love it.
I had such skinny legs as a kid. I always wanted to wear knee socks, you see. So with my mini skirts. So my mother, who always used to make our own clothes, but for this special occasion, she got a dressmaker, a German dressmaker who lived out in King City to make the dress. And I went to Stitzky's with my mom. We bought this sparkly fabric, and the dressmaker made this incredible outfit. And here I am at my sweet 16, you see. Wearing a mini dress, sparkly, with the knee socks there.
I love it.
It was just so great to be able to take these glamorous images and spin them into something that became our own. I mean, could I ever go out and buy designer clothes like that? Never, never, never. So we made them ourselves. And that, I guess that's what gave me such an appreciation for not only, you know, the visuals of fashion, but really the art and craft that went into clothing. But I never thought I would pursue a career in fashion. That wasn't my thing. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be on stage. And I guess that's why I loved clothing as well, because it was costume to me.
Right, and it's expression. It's expression.
Exactly, and I ended up going to acting school in New York. I started acting professionally, actually, when I was 16 years old, to acting school in New York. I ended up going to study the art of mime in Paris, because, you know, I wanted to really communicate with an audience, and I didn't want to have to rely on what I was saying and even what I was wearing. I just wanted to create illusions. Anyway, that was a great period for me back in 73, 74, that I lived in Paris. But then when I came back from Paris, there wasn't much work around for mime artists. So I, you know, worked as a waitress. I went back to university for a bit to study theater. And then I ran off to St. John's, Newfoundland with a wonderful guy who was studying folklore at Memorial University. So 1975, I got to Newfoundland. I was the only mime artist in the province. And I thought, well, this won't do, because there's not much work for mime artists in Newfoundland. I didn't think they
in Newfoundland, of all places.
I know. It's like, boy, what's the matter? You cat got your tongue? You know, you look so pale, my dear. I was doing some performance, but, you know, it just wasn't enough. So I don't know where I even got this idea. I knocked on the door of CBC Radio. And I said, you know, you need somebody to talk about the arts. Nobody was talking about the arts on the CBC back in those early days, really. They were talking about the fisheries and the oil refineries and the other concerns, especially what was going on in Newfoundland. So they gave me, I don't know how this happened, but there was a young producer who just taken over this show, and they gave me the job of talking about the arts on this radio noon show. So I did that for 3 years, started producing arts documentaries for the network, moved back to Toronto in 1978. And I had, you know, all this great experience. I had an arsenal of tapes, knocked on every radio station door, finally got hired by Chum Radio, 1050 Chum, which was the cool station that I'd grown up listening to. And I was their good news girl. It was a wonderful time, because that year, Chum Radio bought City TV, which was this really hip and happening cable TV station started by Moses Neimer. And they decided to take me, the good news girl, and J.D. Roberts, who was like the boss jock on Chum, and give us a TV show called The New Music that was all about running around the world interviewing rock stars. So I was like in heaven, like, you know, I was back in my visual medium that I loved so much that I could, you know, actually be a performer again. And then that's how it happened. I did The New Music for 6 years, a great groundbreaking show, ran around the world with all kinds of rock stars and had a blast. But then, you know, round about 1985, I thought, you know, if I have to interview Rod Stewart once more, I'm going to lose it. Like, enough isn't, not that I love Rod Stewart, but I met all my childhood idols, you know, what's next?
And to imagine that you'd even be thinking this. Like, if I've got to do this again.
And then, you know, I heard that someone was putting together a fashion video show, because they thought maybe fashion videos could do for the fashion industry what music videos did for the music industry, but they needed a vehicle for these fashion videos that had started to be produced. And they started auditioning models, because they thought they're going to have a hot young model introducing the show and she'd be the fashion VJ. And I heard about it and I thought, no, 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 pick me. I love fashion. I've worked my butt off. I could talk to the designers the way I talked to the musicians. We could find out who these luminaries were, you know, go behind the scenes with them, go backstage, go into their studios, just as we had done with the rock stars. And, you know, before too long, they said, okay. I mean, I had to lobby for the job for sure. They weren't too keen to give it to me, but I thought, come on, I paid my dues. You got to give it to me. And I started hosting fashion television in 1985, and that ran for 27 years.
Wow. And I find that fascinating because from both, you know, a lot of our viewers right now are entrepreneurs, but such an entrepreneurial spirit, and talk about, you know, creating your own opportunities, right? Like you were telling, like, no, 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 this is what you need to do. And I'm your person and allow me to do this. And I think that's incredibly inspiring, Jeannie. And maybe we can dive a little bit more into that, because also, you know, I find that there's a balance of everything. There's a balance of life and your career and how you personally identify to this. And what I found really fascinating, and when you and I last spoke, it was the timing that everything came together for you, and also what was happening in the industry, where both the music and the fashion worlds were colliding together. All of a sudden, you know, rock stars and designers are partying together, and that's really at the same time as you kind of slid in and really started bringing to light this industry.
Yeah, there's no way, you know, there's no doubt that the realization that imagery was becoming so important in music and marketing right around that time, you know, like the early to mid 80s, you know, we started to see designers hanging out with the rock stars. You know, Gaultier was designing for Madonna, Thierry Mugler was designing for David Bowie, Versace and Elton John were best mates. And all of a sudden, I was always looking for the next big thing and the next arena. What was going to be, you know, that next area that would really be so larger than life and so theatrical and so fabulous and so iconic. And I was looking to make great television, you know, so for me, it was always about theatrics, you know, where was the greatest show being staged? And I realized it was in the fashion world, because it was all about the visuals and it was all about that kind of communication, and it could incorporate elements of music. And the rock stars were like sitting in the front rows of the fashion shows. So all of a sudden you had all these celebrities dropping by. So there was that element too, but it really was about personal expression, and it was about sex. You know, fashion, let's face it, you know,
sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right?
The way we move through the world. You know, some of us are sexier than others, and some of us wear sexier clothes than others, but you know, everything about it just appealed to me. And I had so much experience dealing with these rock stars and pop stars, and I went through that whole punk area where people were like, you know, spitting at my camera lens, and, you know, really interviewing people that were just not very friendly and have an attitude. And I thought, well, I'm, you know, going to try my hand at doing it with the designers. I mean, the designers were way nicer, although a lot of them weren't that TV savvy in the early days. They were pretty shy and inhibited and quiet and didn't, you know, necessarily say that much, because they were used to working in the back rooms to some degree. They weren't used to being out there front and center. And then you started to realize that in order to have a great fashion house, there had to be personality there too, which is kind of sad in a way, because, you know, it's not always the people with the greatest personalities that have the most design talent, but still it you know, just all these elements coming together. Wow, what a ride. I mean, that whole, you know, the late 80s and certainly into the 90s, the 90s. I mean, what, and I
so bring us back to those 80s, that time where you're entering the scene, fashion television is launching 1985. You know, what was happening in the fashion world? What was happening, you know, on that scene at that moment in time? And And I think that you were talking last time you and I spoke, you were talking about how really it was about expression of sexuality, and Madonna bringing that light, that about the women empowerment. And I think it's also very interesting that you as a very strong female persona figure is also coming onto that scene just when women empowerment was becoming a really big deal.
A really, really interesting time for me personally. And, my life was being played out there, as you say. It was a time, mid 80s, I got married and decided I wanted to have kids, but I had this great career that was really bubbling up, and I wanted it all. And could women really have it all? That was the question. And yeah, I thought, you know what, I think we can, maybe not all at once, or in little bits and pieces. And I was determined to try and show all my sisters out there in the world that yes, you can do it. You can have this great career, and you can work like a dog, and you can travel the world and really live the dream. And you can also have a family, and you can try to juggle that. I mean, you have to be a really good juggler, but hey, I did it, and I lived to tell the tale. It wasn't easy, really wasn't easy. I always say I cried myself to sleep in hotel rooms all over the world.
Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah, as every working mother can. But it was happening, and the scene, wasn't going to stop for anyone. I couldn't possibly have thought, well, and now I'm going to, put that on the back burner and have my babies, and I will come back to work like a year later. I mean, that's a whole other thing. There was no such thing as taking a year off for mat leave, and they would have the job waiting for you when you got back. They might have to give you a job months later, but it certainly wasn't necessarily.
As they say in the showbiz, the show must go on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, so it was all about empowerment and empowering oneself, because if you didn't feel like you had the power to do it, you would just be, left in the dust. So, and then clothes became emblematic of that. Of course, we saw clothes as a kind of urban armor. These were the garments that were going to, protect us, that they were going to herald our arrival. We had the big shoulder pads,
right.
We had lots of bling, because we wanted to really make statements that were just so larger than life.
And maybe feminize that armor that you were speaking about. I love that analogy. It's really symbolic.
Yeah, the whole idea of, Madonna, thank her for popularizing the notion, her and Jean-Paul Gaultier, innerwear as outerwear, a trend that's very au courant now, and everyone's still wearing slip dresses, but there's nothing really new in fashion, let's face it. But those days when you could wear a gorgeous little bra, under your man style suit, and there was something about that juxtaposition that was very compelling, that really did say a lot about who we were and who we really wanted to be.
Right. And then roll in the 90s, where, I think there was a little bit more of a minimalistic approach to that. What do you recall from the 90s?
Well, certainly as the 90s rolled along, that the whole idea of uniform dressing became very in vogue. The early 90s, I think there was certainly a lot of frivolity and a lot of glam and a lot of color, and it was the age of the supermodel, of course. So, we were really celebrating ourselves in a wonderful way. Fashion used to be about everybody doing the same thing, and suddenly fashion was about everybody doing your own thing. And that was something that a lot of us really were thrilled about. But as the 90s proceeded, and the economy started, getting a little less robust, let's say, this whole idea of minimalism and pulling back and not being ostentatious. Miuccia Prada, of course, introduced that whole idea really of uniform dressing and wearing these high-tech fabrications. I think we started to look to the world of textiles and fabrics as the new frontier a little bit more, and came up with some really interesting fabrics that we hadn't worn before, like a lot of the nylons that really had a kind of strength and a force to them. So that by the end of the 90s, things started to get, it was just different until, of course, then the millennia came along, and we were all totally exhilarated by the fact that we were entering this whole new era, so then there we go in the 2000s again, lots of frivolity going on, like bring out the feathers and start really, celebrating ourselves, with, of course, 2001, 9/11. And then what were we going to head into? And nobody knew. I was in New York for 9/11. Of course, this happened during Fashion Week, just before the Oscar delivery.
Right.
And that was like, oh, okay, now where is this ball going? I remember writing essays at the time, really speculating that, what, fashion might be over. I really thought, who could possibly care?
Because of 9/11.
Yeah. I thought, we had reached a state of hedonism. Like I remember the night before 9/11, we were down at the piers, at the Chelsea Piers. Mark Jacobs did a show. And it was like, I really remember thinking, wow, this sort of feels like the fall of the Roman Empire. Like there is just hedonism. He had this huge wall lined with gardenias, and people were sitting at these long tables outdoors, like having a feast. And it was just, wow, the scene had just, fashion was exploding. And I thought, this is fabulous, but how long can this go on? And then of course, the next morning, 9/11, and we were all like stopped dead in our tracks. And of course it was like, oh yeah, get out of here. Fashion Week is, over, canceled, and, go as soon as possible. Right. And I was actually in New York with my friends, Bonnie Brooks and Barb Atkin, who was fashion director of Holt Renfrew for so many years. And, and Bonnie, who of course at the time was, running Lane Crawford in Hong Kong. And the three of us rented a limo to drive us back to Toronto. We just had to get home. It was the most frightening, horrible. Right. I honestly tell you, Janelle, I really thought, okay, that's it. Fashion, no, it's not going to be about fashion ever again. However, the next season, a certain spirit took over, and it really maybe was about humanity and who we really are after all. And it was quite wonderful to see. There was a lot of white and a lot of this beautiful ethereal fashion. There was a lot of optimism. There was really a lot of hope in the air that fashion was going to go on. And we still had to, remember that we are creatures that do like to dress up and adorn ourselves and lift our spirits that way. And fashion did come back with a vengeance. It was very heartening to see.
I find that such a fascinating story, Jeannie, and thank you for sharing that experience of 9/11 through your eyes. I think we all remember or recall where we were exactly in that moment when it happened. And I had the pleasure of visiting the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York City. And as you're describing, I guess, the rebirth of fashion, if I can call it that, the season following 9/11, and white and bright and just almost like this pure emergence from the ashes, if I can even say that. It somewhat relates, and it's somewhat, I think, will be the same as we're living through very unknown times and unprecedented times right now. And I love hearing this story because I think that also gives us hope in what's going to happen to fashion. And we'll touch on that in a little bit later on our conversation, and how the current pandemic is affecting the fashion world. But I find it really interesting to see the transition and how various world events affect fashion. Music affects fashion. Fashion is also an expression of art as well. And you touched on that. And for any of our viewers, listeners today, I highly recommend that you subscribe to Jeannie's new podcast, Beyond Style Matters. I've really found it delightful in the interviews and the walk through, the history of fashion through your eyes and various events. And as they say it, being in the trenches, I think to some, the fashion world can be intimidating. I think to some, it can be inspiring, but really to look at, the fashion world can be rather superficial at times. How did you find a way? Because in speaking with you, and we've had the pleasure of having a few conversations together so far, which have lasted far longer than they should have, but so much to talk about. How did you carve a space for yourself in that? And how did you find, the willingness to also not lose yourself in all of that? Because, it can be a very difficult industry to work in.
Well, as they say, as the old saying goes, ignorance is bliss. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I didn't know that this was an arena that was filled with huge egos and a lot of people that maybe weren't so nice. An arena that was consumed with image to the point of scariness. I didn't realize that, I guess listen, I always do say the fashion world is just a microcosm for the world at large. I mean, yes, the fashion world can be quite a snake pit, but perhaps the world is that way too. Yes, there are some questionable characters that inhabit the fashion world, but there are some questionable characters that inhabit the world at large.
Right.
But my naivete served me well. I was a cheerleader. I just wanted to celebrate, and we never wanted to put anybody up against the wall. I mean, I always felt like, well, I'm not doing 60 minutes here. We're celebrating fashion. I wasn't a fashion critic. I didn't know enough about it really to be a fashion critic. I never had studied it academically. The fact that I was from Canada really served me well too, because I think Canadians are just a lot nicer. And
interesting, yeah.
People now say to me, and a lot of these great old people that I'm interviewing, from the old days too, like Betsy Johnson or Anna Swee, Isaac Mizrahi, right, or on recent versions podcast. Of my podcast, they're all saying, "Oh, you were always so nice. You were always such a nice person." I talked to Sandra Bernhard the other day for my podcast. She goes, "I just got off the phone with Andre Leon Talley, and he was just saying what a nice person you always were." And at the time, if you would have called me nice, I probably would have thought, how boring is that? That's pretty right. But now I'm proud that I was that nice. And because I was generous, genuinely nice, I think people in the fashion industry were a little taken aback, surprised. But those, that were at a certain level did trust me and appreciate me, and were very generous in terms of giving me access. And they wanted me there at their shows. They wanted the fashion television camera there, pardon me, to really, help put their message out there. So that was really good. You asked me, how did I survive, I suppose, in a world that could be that callous and cold-hearted, perhaps,
right,
and the snake pit. But I think, despite the fact that I always wore very high stilettos, my groundedness came from my parents. And my parents, as I said earlier, Holocaust survivors. They worked really hard for everything they had. My dad's motto was always one of fearlessness and tenacity. He always said, "Don't be afraid and never give up." That's what saw him through the war. And that was really what was in the back of my mind all the time. Even if I was running after Karl Lagerfeld for a 30-second soundbite, "Don't be afraid, never give up." And Karl, great, let me through.
I love that. I love that.
I
will take that with me. Never give. Don't be afraid. Never give up.
No matter what you do in life, don't be afraid and never give up. I mean, these times that we're living through right now, this pandemic, we have to be fearless and we have to be tenacious. Just don't give up. Keep the faith. Keep on going, no matter what. So all those things, it's always about your foundation. It's always about how you were brought up and the way you were taught to see the world. And then that is the way I saw even the fashion world and still see it. Yeah, there's a lot of negativity, but that's part of life too.
So you made reference to your naivete serving you well, because you almost, and I imagine this young, impressionable, daring Jeanne Beker going out there into the world. And I may have mentioned that in my earlier days, I was in broadcasting as well. And I can relate to that. And I feel that. But I also think about, your naivete had probably served you well in the beginning until you started to realize, wow, I just got an interview or a soundbite with this person and that person. And you were talking about having these conversations and in the coulisses of fashion shows and trenches and meeting so many very interesting characters. Did you ever hit a time where you maybe started to realize the ampler that of what you were doing, and maybe started to feel intimidation? Was there ever a time where you might have gotten a little nervous before, like, or were you just blaringly going about things?
No, I tell you, and this is the truth, when you're standing in front of someone, whoever it is, if you've got a camera behind you capturing it all, and that camera is on your team, like that's part of your crew, that's your guy.
Yeah.
It is incredibly empowering. It's incredibly empowering. That doesn't, I don't want to sound like I'm some kind of, megalomaniac or invincible.
No, not at all.
If I ever did have a little bit of nervousness, it dissipated the minute I knew my camera was rolling and I had that person, because all of a sudden they were in my court and I was rolling on them, and I had the ability to, take their message out there or not, or I had the ability to,
right.
say, okay, stop the tape. Not that I ever did. I did that once with a creepy Iggy Pop interview that you can Google and see on YouTube if you ever want.
I will.
Really horrifying experience. That's for another show. But really, must say, I can't really think of times, where I really felt nervous. I mean, there were times when I was so excited, I get the butterflies, like if I saw some big, fabulous luminary in that world coming towards me, and I knew I was going to get a chance to ask them a question, and that was just so crazy exciting for me. It was just intoxicating almost. I mean, I lived for those moments too, but I always kept an open mind and an open heart. I never ever, I honestly tell you, never interviewed a designer who wasn't really nice. Not all of them were, incredibly articulate. Not all of them were, as fun to interview as others. But they were always, the mean people in fashion were their henchmen. The fashion PR people, the
gatekeepers.
Yeah, who try to keep you from them, and that they made me cry oftentimes. But the designers themselves were an absolute joy. And that's one of the biggest blessings of my professional life, without question, was the fact that I got to get up close and personal with so many creative geniuses over such a long period of time, for decades. People like Alexander McQueen, and people like certainly Gautier or a Valentino or Gianni Versace, or Bill Blass, Jeffrey Bean, when I think of the great Americans, Oscar de la Renta, it just goes on and on, the incredible people that I had a chance to have, like very long, sometimes conversations with. I got a chance to just ask them anything from a very, sometimes almost naive point of view, but that was okay, because I was a stranger in a strange land, certainly in the early days of my career. And I think that's one of the reasons that fashion television resonated with people, because I was taking viewers by the hand every week saying, come with me, we're going to discover this together. We're going to get turned on to this together. I wasn't talking from some, esoteric, academic place, like, like, darling, let me tell you what I know. No, like, wow, isn't this great? Can you believe it?
And you really, from my standpoint, and what's so impressive about you, Jeannie, is how, some women that I know in my surroundings, of more mature generations, you had such an impact right then and there. However, being a part of the younger generation, I mean, to hear the stories of Jeanne Beker, but to also now get to hear them from your account through your podcast, I find that just really fascinating. And thank you. Thank you for doing that to the world, because even to this day, you continue to do this.
Well, I have always said the most precious gift that we can give one another are our own personal stories. So, really, you want to hear what I have to say? Okay, I'm there for you. And I just am so grateful again and blessed that I've had that life that has been, larger than many, because I have been out there, because I've had the chance to get up close and personal with so many extraordinary people. So I've got to share that. I'm compelled to, I want to, it's a privilege to.
And you've made fashion relatable. You've made that, you talk about, taking the viewer and holding them by the hand, and you weren't this wealth of knowledge and sitting there and saying, well, let me tell you about what I know, but really about, and I, pardon me for using the expression, but about dumbing it down and to really make it so that the general consumer would take an interest and would take, it's about the exploration of something new as well, and something unknown.
Yeah.
I think that's what really made you relatable to everyone at home. And I mean, we're not just talking about Canada here. You're on the global stage of fashion, and really giving people the permission to learn about that industry.
Well, obviously timing counts for a lot, timing met with, opportunity and a kind of nimbleness, and you've got to be ready to take the bull by the horns and jump in there when the time is right.
Right.
A lot, but it is timing. And for me to have been able to open this window onto this incredibly glamorous world that was a very secretive, mysterious world for so many, for so long. And to be able to show people, what goes on, behind the velvet curtain, that was a real, again, a privilege. And I think one of the most satisfying things about, my life's work is that I see people now, I meet people from all over the world, whether they grew up in Brazil or, Dubai, or they're from most, incredible countries, Iceland or Romania or whatever, and they work in fashion today. And they say to me that they got turned on to the fashion world because they saw fashion television, and it made them aware of these incredible possibilities. A lot of people in the gay community too. We have so many great fans in the gay community, kids that grew up in these redneck little, towns and villages all across the country and North America and the world, really, that never really saw anybody else quite like them, or they never realized that there was this whole world of possibilities for them, because they grew up kind of feeling out of sorts, or like freaks. And all of a sudden, we showed them the possibilities. Wow, that was really incredible that we got a chance to do that at that time, and then of course, fast forward to the way things are now, everything is so exposed, everything is so out there, you don't need a backstage pass to see a lot of that stuff anymore. So the scene in some ways has lost its luster, I think. And I think a lot of young people are cognizant of that as well. Not to say that we don't love, the machinations of the fashion world and what goes on behind the scenes, but it kind of is overexposed and it's lost.
Yeah, the mystère is the mystère, or the mystery of that industry maybe has faded a little bit. But I think it's really, we find ourselves in a time right now where we're in transition once more. in a very big way.
Mhm.
And how are you seeing, what are your thoughts surrounding how you look at global events? We talked about that earlier, how it influences or affects the fashion world. Obviously, the pandemic is affecting everyone globally, but amidst all of that, we also have racial matters coming to light as well, that are also taking another influence. And so, I find that our lives, various industries, particularly fashion as well, is really being pounded from and molded and shaped and from various factors. What are your thoughts? How do you think we're going to emerge from this? What do you think we can expect to evolve from what's currently happening in 2020?
As fashion enthusiasts, as
Yes.
fashion supporters, for looking at it through that particular lens.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's been a great eye opener. I think we had much too much in the fashion world. There, just excess. There were too many labels. There were too many retailers, perhaps. There was just too much going on, and that, as we see, has, it's sad. It's very sad, because for a lot of struggling businesses, designers, fashion houses, retailers, the pandemic has just been, the nail in the coffin. But
Right.
I think, that kind of, had to happen, because we were living in this age of excess that was, just an embarrassment of riches. And we had too much that we didn't need, and a lot of stuff that really wasn't up to snuff. So it certainly is a case of survival of the fittest now in fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good thing, because that is going to really, make sure that whatever is out there, is going to be worth it. Is going to be, quality, and is going to stand for something. I think that this whole time, these struggles that we're going through, also has sensitized us and humanized us to a certain degree. And hopefully more and more, it's been, a kind of awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So awakening, and realizing, what meaningful things we should be looking at to put on our closets, or, put in our closets, or put on our bodies, or to, what things are really going to warrant us to open our wallets and really spend and buy. And I think there's a great new appreciation for artisanal things, for things that are locally made. We care about the planet. We have a new appreciation for things that are handcrafted. Things that are made with great skill and great care and great love, things that are really going to last a lot longer. We don't want this temporary quick fix stuff anymore. Fast fashion is slowly going the way of the dinosaur, thank God. I mean, still might take time, but we've got to really, teach our kids that too. Fast fashion is not good for the planet. I think kids are really, really realizing it too. So that's good. I think the whole, willingness now to recycle and upcycle, sustainability, is becoming incredibly important. It's probably the biggest, most important conversation going in fashion these days. So, all those things, play on our appetites for fashion, the way we consume it, the way we wear it. And of course, this whole time, of being at home and being cozy and wanting those creature comforts. We're seeing now a lot of this cozy dressing and a more volume, clothes that are a little more forgiving. That's part of it. But I do believe that there's a place for everything in fashion. It's not to say that, and now that we're entering into this period, like form-fitting clothes are going to go out the window because nobody wants to be that restricted anymore. No, there will always be a place for that too. We kind of still want it all, but footwear, the footwear industry, wow, like things have really changed. Comfort used to almost be, comfort meant looking schleppy. Comfort meant, okay, you put your sneakers on and you're comfortable, but it doesn't really look very sexy. It doesn't really look very great. But now that's totally changed too.
Completely.
Many women may never get into high heels again. I mean, I did wear a pair out to dinner the other night, and they elevated me and reminded me of, you know, who I do really want to be. So that was definitely good for the soul. But, you know, we all need that eclecticism in our wardrobes, and now maybe more than ever.
And I think it's going to be a matter, personally, I think that it's going to be a matter of maybe a little bit more curated wardrobes, a little bit more conducive to our lifestyles. And although it is really nice to have the opportunity to dress up and feel, you know, for women and feel feminine or proud of the outfit that you're wearing, and it really does. I mean, an outfit does change your behavior, your personality, your demeanor. But I think that more so now, fashion has to adapt to lifestyle. And although you probably were quite happy to wear your heels out for dinner, I'm sure you're quite happy to kick them off too at the end of the night, right?
But, you know, I don't know. Michael Kors once told me, you know, the heat's too hot, get out of the kitchen. You know, I try to never complain about the shoes that I'm wearing. You know, but now too, we've seen the technology is just advanced to such a degree that,
Right.
you know, you can wear high heels that are actually quite comfortable. Like, wow, whoever would have thought? I mean, you know, I think the times are really challenging designers in wonderful new ways, and, you know, there shouldn't be too much discomfort.
No, and I think that, you know, where you were saying there's nothing new in fashion, it's all cyclical and it continuously comes back. Don't you find though that like you said, designers are now being challenged, because how often has it come that active or comfort wear came into play in designers' collections, really? And now they're having to incorporate it. So it's almost giving them a new platform, a new, you know, I would compare it to a chef being told, like, you know, I envision this reality TV show with 3 different fridges. You don't know what's behind the door, and you open the door and you've got 5 ingredients in the fridge. You got to create something amazing with it, right?
Yeah.
That's,
well, without question, you know, I still think, you know, a frontier that's, you know, and perhaps it's the final frontier. Well, technology hasn't been incorporated enough into fashion. You know, wearable technology is going to change so much. I remember years back, and this was really quite, you know, maybe around 2005, I want to say.
yes, I was hoping you would lead into that.
Saint Chilean did a brilliant show that was technology inspired, and Saint Chilean, very avant-garde, Turkish-born, you know, British designer, just a genius, really, very, very fashion forward. And he did, you know, dresses that would, you know, light up and that would change and transform, like in front of your eyes, and things that were remote controlled, or you could, you know, you could turn like a long evening gown into a mini dress with, you know, the press of a button. You know, I'm surprised we're not seeing more of that. Like we still seem to be going back to a lot of the old fabrics, and you know, certainly there's a great romance and nostalgia that associated with that, and great value, sentimental value in some of these older things that sort of become new again. But I'm, you know, really excited by the advancements that are being made, you know, obviously in technology, but also maybe fabrications. Like, why, you know, this whole idea of seasonless dressing. There should be some fabric that, you know, will keep you incredibly warm in the winter and will feel incredibly cool and lightweight in the summer. And why are we still just always reverting to these traditional fabrics? You know, I think we should be playing a little more with new notions. Or, you know, why should we, you know, I often thought clothes that were infused with a scent. You know, why do we have to buy bottles of perfume when maybe, you know, the things that we put on, you know, just always smell a certain way, and, you know,
right.
Or that are self-cleaning. I mean, why can't they come up with a solution to that? That would be good. You know, there's just so much that one could.
I would love that. I find it very, it'll be interesting to see where the world, and I do hope that we do see emergence of technology with fabrics and incorporate it into fashion. But technology has had a huge role to play in fashion with how fashion is being consumed. You know, and we talk about the Jeanne Beker being a pioneer in so many different levels. But Jeanne, you actually were part back when most of the world didn't even know about the internet or had access to the internet. You were part of, you know, the internet's first fashion site.
Yeah.
You know, to think, tell us a little bit more about that, because I found that very fascinating, and how long ago that was.
Around about 1994,
Yeah.
which doesn't really seem that long ago to me. I don't know. I was approached by MCI, the great, American communications giant, who said to me, "We want to start an internet fashion site, and we want you to be the cyber host." I didn't even know what they were talking about. I didn't really know what the internet was. I can't believe I used to say that. I didn't know what, but I didn't. I didn't know what a cyber host, like, what do you mean? And they said, yes, well, there aren't enough women using the internet now. And so in order to excite women to come and use the internet, we will have this fashion site. It was sort of like it would be like a virtual magazine or so. They didn't even know really how to describe it to me. And they started, I went down to Atlanta, where the MCI's offices were based, and really started talking to them about, okay, could I bring some of these designers and models and fashion visuals to the internet, and could we talk about them, and could we analyze trends, and could I answer people's questions and profile some of these fashion luminaries? And I said, well, sure, it would just be like, doing a magazine, but we do it like online, which I didn't really understand what online meant. They came to my house and they set me up somehow, and they said, okay, this is how you surf the net. This is, you're on now, like, just do it. And it was, whoa, this
do your thing.
World opened up. And we launched this site. It was called At Fashion, the ampersand at Fashion. And we did that for about a year. It was totally trailblazing. And they said, we know this may not last, whatever, but we want to say that we were the first to have a fashion site on the internet. So,
and they were
first to create a fashion site for the internet. And now, like, with fashion on the internet is so ubiquitous, it's crazy.
Right. You don't exist unless, and that's part of, technology, and then how the role it has to play with fashion. And that's just one of the multiple accomplishments, Jeanne. And as we're wrapping up here, it really has been a true honor and pleasure in speaking with you. But when I think about the Jeanne Beker and the long list of accomplishments that you've achieved, in 2016, you were inducted in the Canada Hall of Fame. The Walk of Fame, yes. and I think you're an author, you're, a television personality, you've inspired so many. If you were to pick one highlight from your career that was the most meaningful, or that you feel like, wow, you really reflect upon it, what would that be?
Well, certainly I think getting the Order of Canada, that was pretty incredible. When I actually picked up that honor in 2014 at Rideau Hall, that was a moment for me, especially thinking about my parents and what they had been through, and how they had come to this country with so many hopes and dreams and little else really, but a lot of faith and a lot of good intentions and determination, and how that had translated, and how, it was really the culmination of a lot of things for me, realizing that I really, was able to make that kind of mark. And, it certainly isn't like the end of something, then it becomes the beginning of something. Then you start to realize, okay, now this is really something to live up to, and I have to continue to be a great citizen, and I have to really continue to touch people and to somehow, change things even just a little bit, change the world. That's a big one, but maybe change, the way people see the world. And you can do that by by reaching out and touching people and communicating and telling stories and sharing. I think we're all really compelled to do that, and we all have wonderful stories to share. I mean, mine happened to have taken place in a very, interesting, glamorous arena that, a lot of people don't have access to. But I think, the simplest life stories of survival, and nothing in life really is ever that simple. But I just mean, you don't really have to, be talking to, rock stars and celebrities and world famous designers to, to have great stories to tell. I think everybody does. Just look around, at your life and really start to, open up and share and talk, because I think communication is really key to survival for all of us moving forward. It really is all. And I guess that's why, I love the media so much, because ultimately, it is about communication. And that's ultimately why I love fashion, because I believe fashion is about communication. We say so much to each other through the clothes that we choose and the accessories that we choose to adorn ourselves with.
Right. Jeanne, thank you for sharing. Thank you for your contributions, not only in the fashion world, but as a woman, as an entrepreneur, as a mother as well, and women's quest to have it all, as you say, and do it all. So thank you for how much you've contributed to the industry and the fashion world, and to young women like myself. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeanelle. It was an absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure talking with you. And just remember, don't be afraid and never give up.
Love it.
Everybody out there.
Thank you, Jeanne. Bye.